Hey guys, old McWaller here. I just wanted to go over a couple things with you guys. Um, this is not the video I was telling you guys about, where I was going to show you guys what I did over there. Um, I don't really like that, but I'm gonna have to do something like that over each one of these just as a temporary thing. Um, but but I really don't like that design over there. It looks a hot mess, but it'll do what it needs to do. But before it gets too dark, I really wanted to talk to you guys about summer plants, especially tomatoes and some other things. I just planted four tomatoes here. These are my yellow pear tomatoes. These are my Tappy's Heritage tomatoes. I love those tomatoes. They're about the size of, they're slicing tomato about the size of like a tennis ball. And that's perfect for my size, perfect for you if you want to eat yourself, or perfect for slicing on a sandwich, or even slicing up to put in a salad without, you know, being too huge. All right, so what I want to talk to you guys about is how to plant these things. And I want to talk about tomatoes first. I have a total of 6 tomatoes that I want to plant. So let me show you guys. Hopefully you guys can see this. Now make sure I'm in the camera. So what can you see? So let's talk at this point. I know you guys can see that. Okay. You can see that whole thing. Okay, cool. So here's a tomato that I'm growing in the house. This is one of my red cherry tomatoes. It's been outside for a little while. It looks kind of bad, but it's not too bad. I'll get it fixed. First thing you want to do when you're dealing with tomatoes is you want to take off all of the bottom stems. This is very important. Matter of fact, you guys can see over here is just a bunch of the leaves that I've cut off tomatoes. I actually don't like to compost tomato leaves. I don't, it's something about those things I just don't like. So what I would do is just cut off everything growing on the stem. Let me bring it down here so you guys can see. So I cut off everything growing on the stem so that I know this stem is completely bare. Now what you would do is you would take this thing out and you would plant it in the ground, right? Or in your container. Now, one thing I want to tell you guys, when you're planting these in a container or even in the ground, and this goes for tomatoes only, guys. This is one of the cool things about tomatoes. One of the things that you do not want to do, most plants, when you see the level here of a plant, most times, most plants, you're going to plant it at that level, right? With tomatoes, you don't want to do that. So for a tomato plant like this, I would actually bury this plant probably that deep. I would probably bury this thing here. So if I was putting this thing in here, I would bury it all the way down like that to grow. That's exactly what I did to each one of these tomatoes here. I buried them. And the reason why you want to do that with tomatoes is because tomatoes have a property in them that they are able to grow. They're able to grow roots from their stem. So you would just drop it down and have it grow out more roots. Now, before you would do something like that, I want you to look at this. Do you see all those roots right here? You see how they look like that? Before you would plant something like that, you would, what we call, disturb the roots. Now, I'm not ready to plant this tomato yet, so I'm not going to do it with this one. Did I leave my gloves? Where are my gloves? Okay. Let me explain to you guys why it's important to disturb your roots. Okay. Plants have in them a kind of like something that it knows that when it grows a certain height, that it's now supposed to start bearing fruit to try to reproduce itself. It's kind of like, think of it as a biological clock, right? Now, when you put a plant like a tomato, a large plant, in something, it actually just happens in all plants, but if you put it in something that's small, after a while, the roots will begin to hit the wall of this thing, and then they'll start to swirl. After a while, that will tell this tomato, it'll send a signal to this tomato that this tomato is actually older than what it actually is. And sometimes what you'll see is, and you can see this when you go to buy these things, you'll start seeing these tomatoes and a little thing like that. They'll all of a sudden have flowers on them. And if you know anything about tomatoes or peppers or anything like that, fruiting plants, when you start seeing flowers, that means it's actually starting to produce fruit. So let me give you an example. I had some cucumbers growing in the house. I put 2 cucumber plants in this plant here, and notice these things have flowers on them. Now they kind of look kind of weak because I didn't water them yet. They have flowers on them, and those flowers tell me a couple things. It tells me that this thing here is root bound in here. I can tell that because that's what root bound plants do. Root bound, once they get root bound, the plant thinks it's older than it is. And it thinks it's like, hey, I'm about to die. So now before I die, I got to hurry up and produce fruit. My biological clock is going off. So let's see what these roots look like. Hopefully I don't damage this thing because I didn't water it. Let's see. Okay, cool. So see what I'm saying? I could already tell that this thing was going to be root bound. So before I plant this thing, what I would do is disturb or break apart these roots. What does that do? When you break apart the roots, that puts this plant in shock. The plant is going to say, oh my goodness, what just happened? I'm about to die. So it stops focusing on producing fruit to now repairing its root system, because it won't be able to produce fruit if its root system is jacked up. It knows that. So what I would do, and what I'm going to do before I actually start planting this, I'm going to tear this thing apart, because I'm going to separate these 2 plants, and then I'm going to cut off all of these flowers. That's going to put this plant into serious shock. It's going to say, what the heck is going on? But because it has enough roots left, it's going to say, okay, I have to produce, and I have to send some energy down into this root system to try to save myself. Once it puts energy into building its own roots, when you put it in something bigger, it's going to realize, hey, I'm no longer in that small container anymore. And now the roots get to go deep. And now it stops thinking it's really old. It stops thinking it's really going to die soon. And now it starts saying, you know what? I got time to grow some more. And then it's going to start actually growing. That's what happens when you disturb the roots of a plant. Now, if I took this plant just like this and put it in the ground or put it in a pot, it'll grow a little bit more, right? Because maybe of my fertilization and stuff like that, but it won't grow rapidly. It won't go large. It won't go big. It'll actually take a long time to actually grow, and it'll actually keep producing these fruit and keep trying to put some cucumbers out, because it's still thinking I'm in, even though I planted it in something bigger, because I didn't disturb the roots, it still thinks it's in that little pot, basically. So that's the importance of disturbing the roots. Now, when I'm talking about disturbing the roots, guys, don't be, don't think that you're hurting the plant. And like, I'm gonna do this right in front of you guys so you know what I'm talking about. I have two plants here, right? So what I'm going to do is literally break apart these two plants. Now, by doing that, these roots that were intertwined are like, what the heck just happened? These plants, these were twins. They were growing up the whole time together, and something just happened. And I'm just going to even break up these roots down here just a little bit. Now, you don't want to disturb the roots closer to the top of the plant. You want to do everything at the bottom of the plant, right? And same, this thing down here, I'm going to just take these roots down here at the bottom and I'm going to break them up, right? So now the plant is like, oh my God, right? So when it's in that state, that's when you want to immediately plant it. Now, when you plant this thing, you have to, in order to make sure that this thing doesn't die from the shock, or sometimes they won't even die from the shock, but it may take them like 3 or 4 days just to even recover from what you just did. What I like to do is shorten that recovery time. Is you want to hit this thing not just with water, but you need to fertilize, and I'm talking about with a liquid fertilizer. Okay, now I'm going to plant these here. I don't know if you guys can you see my black trellis on the camera? Does it pick it up? Yeah, I see it. So these are vines, right? Cucumbers are vines. So I'm going to plant them by this trellis. So I already disturbed the roots, right? Now I'm going to take my shears and put this thing in even further shock by cutting off all the flowers. All the flowers that I see, I'm cutting them off. Being careful not to hurt the stem though, but all the flowers have to go. Now this is why I told you, and I'm probably going to put the video I did a long time ago, because I know I have a lot more subscribers than I had back then when I did this. I actually did a video at a big box store showing you guys how to purchase plants at the store, what to look for and all that kind of stuff like that. And so when you're in the store shopping, do not buy plants that have those flowers in them, because then you have to do all this root bound stuff and all that stuff like that. You don't want to have to do all that when you purchase them, right? But I grew these myself, so I'm going to make sure that they survive, right? Now, in addition to doing all that, I also would do things like cut off any dead leaves or yellowing leaves at that time, because I don't want any of the plant's energy going to taking care of leaves and stuff that are dead or dying. That doesn't help me. That's a waste of my time. I want the plant energy to go strictly into recovery from what I just did, and putting out new roots to make sure that this plant grows healthy and strong. So I cut off all the yellow leaves. I cut off all the flowers, right? The roots are disturbed. You can see all these things. And then I'm going to plant it. Now, I'm going to put down my dry organic mix down here as a fertilizer. But guys, that is not enough. I keep telling, well, maybe I haven't keep telling you guys, but listen, dry fertilizer, especially organic fertilizer, it takes time for that stuff to release. It takes time for it to actually get the nutrients. So you need a liquid fertilizer that's going to immediately give this plant exactly what it needs. Now, because it's dry, I would water it really good first. That's going to soak up all the stuff, soak up this dirt that it was in. Even though I bury it, I'm going to soak this up so that this dirt is nice and moist. And then I'm going to hit it with a liquid fertilizer so that it can pick it up. And regardless of you always want to disturb the roots, because disturbing roots, again, let me show you my tomato over here. This tomato, even though it's not putting out fruit yet, it's not hard root bound, but you can see this thing is thinking that it's older than it is, right? So I would cut off all these yellowing leaves. I'm going to disturb these roots, and then because it's a tomato, I'm going to plant it about that deep, right? And even though you're planting your tomato deep, you still want to disturb these roots, because you need to tell this plant you are no longer in this anymore. You're in something bigger, okay? And you're going to bury it. Now, if you were burying this plant, if you were planting a tomato in a raised bed, what you would do is like kind of lay it, you would dig a trench, you know what I mean? Like a trench for the tomato. And you would bury it kind of like that and bend the stem up just a little bit and put a stake in the ground to stake the plant up. Okay. And that's how you would do a tomato in ground or in a raised bed. Okay. And lastly, when you're dealing with tomatoes, even after they start growing, let me show you guys a little bit, get a little closer. Let's see if I can zoom in. Tomatoes will sometimes put out plants. Let's say you cut real deep, right? But they'll have a flower like this, and sometimes that flower will be touching the ground like that. Matter of fact, let me get out the way just in case you didn't see. Say this was attached to it'll be touching the ground just like that. Well, when you start seeing tomatoes do that, cut that off, because this will, by sitting on this moist ground, sometimes this will get a disease, and that disease will come in and spread to your plant. So you want to actually just cut that off. Now listen, you are not hurting your plants by doing this. This is called pruning. When you cut all those things off, the energy that's inside here is just going to send this plant straight up and make this plant grow taller, taller, taller. Then once it gets around this size, right, when the bottom leaves or the bottom rung of these leaves get to this side, they're sitting on top of this, you don't have to cut it anymore, because the bottom is going to be empty, and now the bottom leaves are going to be on this side. And that's what you want. You want the bottom leaves of your tomatoes to be on your bottom ring, and anything beneath that bottom ring, you don't really want a whole lot going on, because you don't want to get the disease going on. All right, guys, I hope that was good for you guys to understand how to plant tomatoes and how to they understand why it's important to disturb your roots. All right, peace.